How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Grail or Garbage, the series where I systematically and categorically rank and review knives to give you the context that you need to decide if a knife deserves a spot in your pocket. Here's how it works. We got 5 categories: materials, ergonomics, fidget factor, the lock, and then of course fit and finish. Each category is worth a max of up to 10 points, and at the end we'll add them all up and put them on our public leaderboard so that you'll know for certain once and for all, is it a grail or is it garbage? Let's go. All right, let's go ahead and rank the Curtis Knives F3 medium slicer with the flipper tab delete. Huge shout out again to Old Dominion EDC for sending this my way and for being patient, letting me borrow it long enough to rank it. So let's go ahead and dive in deep, starting with the first category, which is materials. Now, materials is not just what the knife is made out of course. It also has to do with availability, as well as how much does it cost. Value proposition definitely plays a role, as well as availability. Now, this is what I would consider to be a Midtech. Curtis Knives considers these to be full customs because it is one man that makes these out of his shop, and he does a pretty good job of actually putting a decent amount out there for being a one-man operation. As far as I know, he does some of it by hand, some of it with a CNC machine, some of it with a mill. He's a one-man army, and he deserves a lot of credit for that, regardless of whatever the score on this review ends up being, which we will get to. So let's start with materials. The blade is Magna Cut, and then of course you do have milled titanium handle scales, titanium backspacer, titanium pocket clip, and it is of course a frame lock. It is running on bearings, and I really like the use of Magna Cut. Magna Cut is really kind of the up and coming steel from Laren Thomas, and it's one of those steels that people really like. Personally, for my uses, I think that Magna Cut is a great steel. I don't necessarily like it any more or less over, say, 20 CV or LMAX, but I think that it's a really good steel. For all of those reasons, I do have to take into account the price tag. The price tag on this specific one, when it was bought brand new, was about $650. Now, you can get Curtis Customs, the F3 medium slicer with the flipper tab, typically for around $690, $675, somewhere in that realm. That's a lot of money. So I do have to also consider the fact that this is made by one man in one shop, and at the very least, it could be considered a Midtech, at the very highest, custom. And so with all of that into consideration, I have to go ahead and give this a pretty decent score for the materials, especially considering that most people who make knives out of a shop choose a different steel that's easier to work with, because high HRC steels like Magna Cut can wear down machines. So the ability to use Magna Cut is actually very impressive to me. It's going to be getting a 9 out of 10 for materials. Next up, we've got ergonomics. How does it feel in the hand? Are there any hot spots? Is it comfortable? Can you choke up? Can you flip the grip around? Yeah, you know what? It's decently comfortable. I wouldn't say that it's hand meltingly good. The jimping is adequate, and I will say that it does its job. It locks in your hand, but it's also not necessarily comfortable jimping. That jimping is rather aggressive, but it does achieve its purpose. So keep that in mind. The jimping on the backspacer as well is also on the more aggressive side, but because it's flush with those handle scales, it actually doesn't cause any issues as far as grip is concerned. And while this isn't like the most super comfortable knife to grip, it's also not bad. I like the fact that you can really choke up on this knife and get a nice deep controlled grip for some controlled cuts. That's cool. And also in a reverse grip, it works well too. Now, the pocket clip is pretty sweet, but as far as ergonomics are concerned, it does not cause an issue. It is noticeable in the hand, but it's not like super annoying. It's not harsh in the palm. So it's just kind of a non-factor. It's something that, had it been a little more low profile, it would have actually done a really good job of disappearing in the hand and would have actually increased on the ergonomics. But in this case, it's just okay. I definitely like the ergonomics on here because of how you can grip the knife and the fact that a reverse grip works well as well. For those reasons, ergonomics is a 7 out of 10. Next up, we've got Fidget Factor. How fun is this knife to play with? How's the action? How's the detent? Well, the detent is not bad. It's not super crisp, but it's also not necessarily super waffly. Fidget Factor is also, about how you deploy it and how good the action itself is. This is running on bearings. It's not the most fidget friendly knife out there, but it does have almost this ratchet like sound to it, which I do actually enjoy. I think that that's something that kind of adds to the character of the knife and makes it kind of fun as well. I do think that the flipper would actually be a good option to have, but if you're going to have a dedicated deployment option, having these fullers right there is pretty cool, and I do prefer reverse flicking knives myself. The bearing action is smooth. It's not necessarily like the most silkiest thing I've ever run into, but ultimately, while it's not amazing, it's also not bad, and I'm going to be giving it a 7 out of 10 for Fidget Factor. Moving on to the lock. Now, here's the thing about the lock. If you watched my other review, and I will link it up there, you'll know that I mentioned something that Curtis Custom Knives are known to have from time to time, and that is lock rock. And some people say that you can get rid of it by snugging up the pivot. Some people say that they don't have it at all. But this one definitely does have it, and it's not egregious. It's not going to come apart in your hand because your hand is naturally holding that lock bar in place. So I don't think that it's a safety concern, but it is kind of a fit and finish concern. And most people would agree that on a $600+ knife, it's not something that you want to see at all. Other than that, the lockup is good. There is no blade play left or right, up or down. There is just that tiny bit of lock rock, which moves that lock bar towards disengaging. It hasn't disengaged on me, and to my knowledge, or the person that lent this to me. So again, not a safety concern, just not something that we want to see on a knife that costs this much. The blade centering on here is good. There's no issues with that, and I'm constantly reminding myself that this is a one-man job. One man made this knife, and you know what? The lock is pretty good, except for that lock rock, and that lock rock is bad enough of a fit and finish at this price where the lock is only going to be getting a 5 out of 10. Let's move on to the last category, and the last category is fit and finish. And fit and finish isn't just how well it was made, it's also about the design cues. And I gotta say, I really like the design cues. I like the texturing on the titanium handle scales. I like this rough stone wash, black wash finish with the satin going on here, and I like how the fuller is inset, that deployment hole is inset and doesn't go all the way through. I like the risks they took with the jimping. They're like, oh, you want jimping? Well, guess what? Here's some jimping that you won't forget. And I also like how the backspacer looks aggressive, but in fact is not aggressive. The pocket clip is cool. I'm a big fan of crosshairs, and I think that clip just looks good. I have carried this knife in my pocket to go take photos and stuff like that, and that pocket clip works well. The contrast, at least on this one, between the hardware and the color on the scales is pretty neat as well. Ultimately, I'm a big fan of the aesthetics of this knife, and I think that you could do a lot worse for your money when you're looking at a knife that costs this much. Aesthetically speaking, it's a really, really good looking knife. Now, as far as how well it was made, let's remember again, everyone, that this is one man doing all of this work out of his shop. And that is insanity when you think about just how much went into making this knife, to get the milling on those handle scales, to get the pocket clip to look a certain way, it's actually quite impressive in my opinion. It also kind of points out to why some people have issues with lock rock and some people don't. You know, that level of inconsistency is something that you expect on custom knives. When you buy something that's manufactured by a factory, it's not necessarily acceptable. When you get a custom, however, or something that was made by hand or partially by hand or mostly by hand or whatever you want to call that, it's not only something you should expect, it's also something that you have to take into account. Something that makes a custom is the fact that it's not perfect. But you do get a lot of the maker in the knife that you don't get out of a production knife. This knife feels like it has character, and in a world where so many knives just feel numb and overdone, this is a breath of fresh air, and I think that it's a knife that anyone could be proud of having. Whether or not you get one that has lock rock is another story. Your mileage may vary, but for those reasons, it's good enough for me to be giving it an 8 out of 10 for fit and finish. All right, let's go ahead and add up all the scores and place it on our leaderboard. For materials, it got a 9. For ergonomics, it got a 7. For Fidget Factor, it got a 7. For the lock, it was a 5. And for fit and finish, it was an 8. So guys, if you add up all of those points, you're going to get a grand total of 36 out of 50. That's right. This is a highly recommendable knife because of how much you get, because you get the custom experience, because you get something that is not muted and feels like every other production knife, because you get so much design out of this knife. But you let me know in the comment section down below. Do you like the knife? Do you dislike the knife? Is that tiny bit of lock rock enough to make you say absolutely not? Guys, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, boo-hoo, you know what to do. And if you want to see more Grail or garbage rankings, make sure you hit subscribe. I'm Rollshambo. I'll catch you on the flip side.